Hi and welcome. I'm Midnight Truth, and it's so nice to have you here tonight, wherever you are right now. Whether you're in bed, lie on the couch, or just looking for a quiet moment, I want you to know this time is for you. Take a deep breath in, and as you breathe out, feel the weight of the day start to fade. Let your mind settle, let your body relax, and let yourself simply be. There's no rush, no pressure, just this calm, quiet moment. If you like, you can close your eyes and imagine yourself in a peaceful place. Maybe it's a cozy room with soft, warm lighting. Or maybe it's under a starry sky, with a gentle breeze brushing against you. Wherever you feel safe and calm, let yourself drift there. I know many of you use these stories to fall asleep. So before we begin, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time is it there? Tonight's story is gentle and soothing, perfect to carry you into a deep, restful sleep. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's begin. I've never been one to scare easily. I've lived alone most of my life, worked odd jobs in quiet places, and even spent a few nights camping in the middle of nowhere without batting an eye. But something about the humming in the diner's walk-in freezer has me second-guessing everything I thought I knew about myself. It started a couple of months ago, and it's not just the sound. It's the way it seemed to follow me. The way it waits until I'm alone, and the way it's turned a job I used to love into something I dread every night. I still don't have answers, and the more I try to figure out, the more it feels like I'm losing my grip. I've been a line cook at Millie's Diner for 3 years. It's a little roadside joint off Highway 17, the kind of place with chip formica tables, a jukebox that hasn't worked since the 90s, and a neon sign out front that flickers when it rains. We're open 24 hours. Serving truckers, late-night stragglers, and occasional lost tourists who didn't mean to end up this far from civilization. The night shift suits me. I like the quiet, the rhythm of prepping food when the world's asleep. It's just me, the waitress Carla, and sometimes a dishwasher if we're lucky. The diner's old, built in the 60s, and it shows. The floors creak, the pipes groan, and the walk-in freezer in back has a door that sticks if you don't yank it just right. I didn't mind any of that until the humming started. It was a slow Wednesday night in January, the kind where the fog rolls in thick and you can barely see the parking lot through the diner's big windows. Carla was up front wiping down the counter, and I was in the kitchen, scrubbing the grill after a late rush of truckers. The clock above the pass-through read 2:15 a.m., that dead hour when even the highway goes silent. I just finished cleaning when I decided to restock the freezer. We keep extra burger patties, fries, and a few tubs of ice cream in there, and I like to check it before the breakfast crowd trickles in. I grabbed a clipboard from the hook by the door, pulled on my jacket, because that freezer's always colder than it needs to be, and tugged the handle open. The air hit me like a slap, sharp and icy, and I stepped inside, letting the door thud shut behind me. That's when I heard it, a low, steady hum, like someone running a finger along the edge of a wine glass. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the usual whir of the freezer's compressor. I stopped, my breath foggy in front of me, and tilted my head to listen. The sound seemed to come from the back corner, near the stacks of frozen buns. I figured it was the motor acting up. Old equipment does that. So I walked over, clipboard still in hand, and checked the shelves. Nothing looked out of place. The hum kept going, soft and unbroken, almost like it was vibrating through the metal walls. I tapped the side of the unit with my knuckles, thinking maybe a loose part was rattling, but it didn't stop. My stomach gave a little twist, though I couldn't say why. I finished jotting down the inventory, hurried out, and locked the door behind me. The hum stayed in my ears even after I was back in the warm kitchen, like a faint echo I couldn't shake. The next night, it happened again. I was in the freezer around the same time, 2:20 a.m., restocking ketchup packets we keep in there to save space. The door clicked shut, and there it was, that same low hum, steady as a heartbeat. This time, I noticed how it didn't match the compressor's rhythm. It was slower, smoother, almost melodic. I stood there, my boots squeaking on the frosty floor, and tried to pinpoint it. The sound seemed to shift, moving from the back corner of the shelves on my left, like it was circling me. My chest tightened, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. I muttered to myself, "Come on, it's just a damn freezer." and banged my fist against the wall. The hum stopped instantly. I waited, holding my breath, but it didn't come back. I grabbed the packets, shoved them onto the shelf, and got out of there fast. My hands were shaking as I locked the door, and I couldn't tell if it was from the cold or something else. For a week, I avoided the freezer after midnight. I'd make excuses, tell Carla I'd check it later, or I'd restock during the day shift when I overlapped with the morning cook. But the diner's small, and there's only so much dodging you can do. One night, Carla caught me dragging my feet and said, "You're acting like that freezer's haunted, Jake. What's your deal?" I laughed it off, said it was just too cold in there, but her words stuck with me. Haunted. I didn't believe in that stuff. Still don't. Not really, but the hum was starting to feel personal, like it was waiting for me. I couldn't keep avoiding it forever, so the next night, I forced myself to go in. It was 2:30 a.m., quieter than usual, with no customers in the booths. I pulled the door open, stepped inside, and braced myself. Sure enough, the hum started, low and steady, rising from the back of the room. My heart kicked up a notch, and I felt that same prickling on my neck. I grabbed my phone from my pocket, opened the voice recorder, and held it out. "All right," I whispered, "let's see what you are." The hum kept going, louder now, almost like it was answering me. I stood there for a full minute, my breath clouding the air until it faded out. When I played the recording back in the kitchen, I heard it clear as day, a smooth, eerie hum that didn't sound like any machine I'd ever known. My stomach dropped, and I deleted the file right then, like that would make it less real. I told Carla about it the next shift. She's been at the diner longer than me, and I figured she might have heard something like it before. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed, and listened while I described the hum, how it moved, how it stopped when I got too close. Her eyebrows went up, but she didn't laugh. "That's weird, Jake," she said. "Maybe it's the pipes or something. This place is falling apart." She suggested I tell Roy, the owner, but I hesitated. Roy's a gruff guy who doesn't like excuses or complaints. I could already hear him saying, "It's an old freezer, deal with it." Still, I left a note in his office the next day, keeping it simple. "Freezer's making a weird humming noise at night. Might need a look." He didn't mention it when I saw him later, and nothing got fixed. The hum kept coming, every night between 2 and 3 a.m. It wasn't just a sound anymore. There were other things. Sometimes I'd feel a faint vibration through the floor, like something was shifting in there. Other times, I'd catch a whiff of something sharp and metallic, like ozone or burnt wiring, but only inside the freezer. My palms would sweat every time I had to go in, and my heart would thud so hard I could feel it in my throat. I started bringing a flashlight, even though the bulb worked fine, just to feel less helpless. One night, I swore I saw a shadow flicker across the back wall. A quick, dark shape that vanished when I turned my head. I told myself it was a light reflecting off the metal, but my legs felt shaky as I bolted out of there. I didn't sleep well after that. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, hearing that hum in my head like it had followed me home. About 3 weeks ago, I decided to get serious. I couldn't keep jumping at shadows. I needed proof, something to show Roy, or even just to convince myself I wasn't losing it. It was a Friday night, slow as hell, with a storm rolling in outside. Rain battered the windows, and the diner felt emptier than usual. Carla was up front, reading a paperback, and I was in the kitchen, psyching myself up. At 2 a.m., I grabbed my phone, the flashlight, and a pocket knife. Not that I thought it'd help, but it made me feel braver. I unlocked the freezer, stepped inside, and let the door swing shut. The cold hit me hard, and I stood there, waiting. At 2:18 a.m., the hum started, soft at first, then building, like it was coming from all around me. I hit record on my phone and swept the flashlight over the shelves. The sound grew louder, vibrating through my boots, and that metallic smell stung my nose. My breath came in short bursts, fogging in front of me, and I whispered, "What the hell are you?" The hum spiked, sharp and piercing, and I felt a jolt, like static electricity snapping against my skin. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the flashlight, and that's when I saw it, a faint shimmer in the air, like heat rising off pavement. right by the burger patties. My heart slammed against my ribs, and I lunged to the door, yanking it open. The hum cut off as I stumbled into the kitchen, my chest heaving, sweat trickling down my spine despite the cold. I played the recording for Carla that night. She listened, her eyes widening, and said, "Jesus, Jake, that doesn't sound like a freezer." The hum was there, loud and clear, with that sharp spike at the end. But there was something else, a faint crackle like static or a distant voice. We couldn't make out words, but it sent a chill through me. She told me to show it to Roy. No excuses this time. The next day, I cornered him in his office, a cramped little room stuffed with invoices and cigarette butts. He listened to the recording, scowling, and said, "Sounds like compressor shot. I'll call somebody." I pushed back, told him about the shadow, the smell, the way it moved. He just grunted, said I'd been working too many nights, and waved me off. A repair guy came a few days later, poked around in the freezer, and replaced a couple of parts. He said it was running fine now. No weird noises. I thanked him, but I knew it wasn't fixed. Not really. The hum came back that night, louder than ever. It was 2:25 a.m., and I was alone in the kitchen. Carla had stepped out for a smoke. I didn't want to go in, but I had to check. I grabbed my phone, steeled myself, and opened the door. The cold rushed out, and the hum hit me like a wave, buzzing through my skull. I stepped inside, and it felt different, heavier, like the air was pressing against me. The shelves rattled faintly, and that shimmer was back, hovering near the ice cream tubs. My mouth went dry, and I whispered, "Leave me alone." The hum stopped, so suddenly it made my ears ring, and for a second, I thought I'd won. Then I heard a low scrape, like metal dragging across metal, coming from the back wall. My flashlight beam shook as I aimed it there, but the wall was solid, no cracks, no vents. My legs locked up, and I felt a cold sweat bead on my forehead. I backed out, slammed the door, and locked it, my hands trembling so bad I dropped the key. I haven't gone in alone since. I tell Carla or the dishwasher to come with me if we need something, and even then, I'm quick about it. The hum still happens. Every night, 2 to 3 a.m., like clockwork. Sometimes it's soft. Sometimes it's so loud it rattles the door. I've caught that shimmer a few more times, always out of the corner of my eye, and the metallic smell comes and goes. Roy won't do anything else. He says the repair guy fixed it, and I'm just stressed. Carla believes me, but she doesn't know what to make of it either. I've tried record it again, but my phone battery dies half the time I step in there now, like something's draining it. I've looked at the diner's history. Nothing weird, just an old greasy spoon with no dark past I can find. Maybe it's the freezer itself, some glitch nobody can pin down. Maybe it's something else. I still work the night shift. I can't afford to quit, but every time I clock in, my stomach knots up. I keep the radio on loud, stay near the grill, and avoid looking at that freezer door after midnight. My hands shake when I pour coffee, and I jump at every clatter from the kitchen. I don't sleep right anymore. I wake up hearing that hum, feeling that cold snap against my skin. I've thought about leaving, finding another job, but part of me needs to know what's in there. The rest of me is too scared to find out. So I stay night after night, waiting for that sound, feeling it creep closer, wondering if it'll ever stop, or if it'll follow me out of that freezer one day and into the rest of my life. That's where I'm at now, stuck between running and facing it, with no idea what it even is. Story 2. I'd been living in that little cabin for about a month when I first noticed the tapping. It wasn't much at first, just a faint, irregular rhythm, like someone drumming their fingers absent-mindedly on a table, coming from the walls. I was alone out there, miles from the nearest neighbor, surrounded by dense pine trees and a gravel road that barely qualified as a path. The cabin was old, rented cheap from a guy who didn't seem to care much about upkeep, and I figured it was just a wood settling or a branch brushing against the siding in the wind. But the sound stuck with me, lodged in the back of my mind like a splinter, and over time, it started to feel less random and more deliberate, like it was trying to get my attention. It wasn't loud enough to scare me right away, but it was persistent, and that persistence gnawed at me until I couldn't ignore it anymore. My name's Riley, and I moved out to that place to get some quiet. I work remotely, data entry, nothing exciting. And I've been craving a break from the constant hum of the city. The traffic, the neighbors arguing through thin walls, the endless buzz of streetlights. The cabin was perfect on paper. One bedroom, a small kitchen with a wood stove, a porch that sagged a little on one side, and a view of nothing but forest stretching out in every direction. The landlord, a gruff older man named Hal, met me at the end of the gravel drive on move-in day. He handed me the keys, a rusted ring with 2 jagged teeth, and muttered something about keeping the fire going winter to stop the pipes from freezing. His truck rattled as he drove off, leaving me with a plume of dust and a vague sense that he didn't much care who lived here as long as the rent cleared. He didn't mention anything about the walls or the noises they might make, and I didn't ask. I was too busy hauling my stuff inside, boxes of clothes, a laptop, a few books, and setting up my new life. The first few days were fine, even peaceful. I got into a routine. Coffee in the morning while the sun crept over the treetops, work at the kitchen table until noon, a walk to the woods in the afternoon to stretch my legs, then more work until dark. The silence was heavy but comforting, broken only by the occasional bird call or the wind rattling the pines. The cabin creaks sometimes, sure, but old places do that. I'd lived in enough drafty apartments to know the difference between a house groaning under its own weight and something worth worrying about. At least, I thought I did. The place had its quirks. The windows rattled when the wind picked up, the floorboards squeaked underfoot, and the wood stove gave off a faint burnt dust smell when I lit it. But nothing I couldn't handle. It felt like a fair trade for solitude. It was late one evening, maybe a week after I settled in, when the tapping started. I was finishing up some spreadsheets, the glow of my laptop screen, the only light in the room, besides a faint flicker from the wood stove. The fire was low, just embers glowing red to the grate, and I was about to call it a night when I heard it. Tap, 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 tap. It came from the wall behind me, the one facing the back of the cabin where the bedroom was. I turned around, expecting to see a shadow or maybe a mouse skittering across the floor, but there was nothing, just a rough pine plank staring back at me. The sound stopped as soon as I moved. I sat there, ears straining, waiting for it to come back. After a minute of silence, I shrugged it off and went to bed, pulling the quilt up to my chin and telling myself it was nothing. Old houses make noises, I thought. That's all it was. The next night, it happened again. Same time, around 10 p.m., same wall. This time it lasted longer. Tap, 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 like someone testing a pattern, feeling out of rhythm. I got up, grabbed my flashlight from the table, and pressed my ear against the wood. The planks were rough, cold to the touch, and I could smell the faint tang of pine resin mixed with something musty, like damp earth. I didn't hear anything more, but my pulse was up, thudding in my ears like a drumbeat. I tapped the wall myself with my knuckles, mimicking the rhythm, tap, 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 half expecting something to tap back, like a kid's game. Nothing did. I stood there for a moment, the flashlight beam wobbling across the wall, then stepped back. It was probably a critter stuck in the insulation. I told myself, a squirrel or a bird nesting in the eaves. That made sense, right? Old cabins have all kinds of visitors, and I'd seen plenty of wildlife on my walks. Deer, rabbits, even a fox once. But then it kept happening. Every night, like clockwork, between 9:30 and 10:30, the tapping would start. Sometimes it was soft, barely audible over the crackle of the fire or the hum of my laptop fan. Other times it was sharper, more insistent, like fingernails clicking on a countertop. It always came from that same wall, the one separating the main room from the bedroom, never anywhere else. I started dreading the evenings. I'd sit there, pretending to work, but really just listening, waiting for it to begin. My stomach would tighten. My hands would get clammy, and I'd catch myself holding my breath, straining to hear every little sound. I tried turning on music to drown it out, some old rock playlist I'd had since college, but the tapping seemed to cut through, faint but unmistakable, like it wanted me to notice it. One night, I decided to investigate properly. It was a Friday, and I'd had a couple beers to take the edge off after a long week of staring at numbers. The tapping started right on cue. Tap, 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 and I grabbed my flashlight and a hammer from the toolbox under the sink. I figured if it was an animal, I'd scare it off or at least find where it was getting in. I slipped on my boots and went outside, the cold biting at my face as I stepped onto the porch. The air smelled of pine and frost, and the woods were pitch black beyond the faint glow of my flashlight. I circled the cabin, the beam dancing across the weathered siding, the moss-covered roof, the dark wall of trees pressing in around me. I didn't see any holes, no loose boards, no signs of anything burrowing. The back wall, where the sound always came from, looked solid, gray planks nailed tight, no gaps I could spot even when I ran my hand along the seams. I tapped on it with a hammer, a few quick raps, and listened. Silence. The wind picked up, rustling the pines and sending a shiver down my spine, but that was it. Back inside, I wasn't satisfied. The tapping had stopped while I was out there, but I knew it had come back. Always did. I dragged the chair over to the wall, climbed up, and started inspecting the seams where the planks met the ceiling. There was a thin crack up top, barely wide enough for a pencil, but it ran the length of the wall. I shined my light into it, squinting to see anything through the narrow slit. Dust floated in the beam, a few cobwebs hung limp and gray, but there was nothing else, no movement, no eyes glinting back at me. My heart was pounding, though, and I felt this weird pressure in my chest, like the air was thicker than it should have been, pressing down on me. I hopped down, put the chair back, and tried to shake it off. Maybe I was just tired, I thought, imagining things after too many late nights. I poured another beer and sat on the couch, staring at the wall like it might confess something if I glared hard enough. The next morning, I called Hal. He picked up on the third ring, his voice gravelly and half asleep, like I'd woken him from a nap. I told him about the tapping, keeping it casual, like, "Hey, you ever hear anything weird in the walls out here?" He grunted, said it was probably mice, and told me to set some traps. I mentioned I'd checked outside, and didn't see any entry points, but he just mumbled something about old houses making noises, and how folks in the country don't fuss over every little sound. His tone was dismissive, like I was some city kid spooked by the wind, and he hung up before I could push it further. I wasn't convinced. Mice don't tap in patterns. They scratch, they scurry, they chew through drywall, but they don't sound like they're sending Morse code through the wood. I drove into town that afternoon, a 20-minute trip down winding roads to a gas station that doubled as a hardware store, and bought some traps anyway. Snap ones, not the humane kind. I wasn't in the mood to play catch and release with whatever was bothering me. I set them along the base of the wall, spacing them out every few feet, and baited them with peanut butter from a jar I brought from the city. For 3 nights, nothing happened. No tapping, no snap traps, just quiet. I started to relax, thinking maybe whatever it was had moved on or gotten tired of my presence. I even slept better, the tension in my shoulders easing up a bit. Then, on the 4th night, it came back, louder than ever. Tap, 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 tap. It was sharp, almost angry, like someone banging on a door to be let in. I checked the traps. Empty, untouched, the peanut butter still smeared in place. My hands were shaking as I reset them, and I could feel sweat trickling down my back despite the chill in the room. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind outside had me sitting up in bed, staring at the bedroom wall, waiting for the next sound. Things got stranger after that. One afternoon, I was out on my walk, about a mile from the cabin, following a deer trail through the woods, when I stumbled into a clearing I hadn't noticed before. It was hidden behind a thick stand of trees, the kind of place you'd miss unless you were looking for it. In the middle was a ring of stones, maybe 3 feet across, blackened like they'd been used for a fire. Scattered around were small twigs arranged in neat little piles, 5 or 6 sticks in each, stacked like tiny teepees, all evenly spaced. It did look natural, not like wind or animals could have done it. My stomach dropped, a cold knot forming as I stood there, staring. I took a picture with my phone, my hands unsteady, the camera shaking just enough to blur the edges. I didn't stick around. I turned back, my boots crunching on the pine needles, and hurried to the cabin, locking the door behind me even though it was broad daylight. When I got inside, I kept glancing at the wall, wondering if there was a connection, some thread tying the tapping to that eerie little scene in the woods. That night, The tapping was relentless. It started at 9:45 and didn't stop in nearly an hour. Tap, 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 tap. I sat on the couch, flashlight in hand, staring at the wall like it might open up and spit something out. My chest felt tight, my mouth dry, my fingers gripping the flashlight, so hard my knuckles ached. I tried recording it with my phone, holding it up to the wood, pressing the mic against the planks, but when I played it back, all I got was static and faint hum. No clear taps, no rhythm, just noise. It was like the sound didn't want to be caught, like it slipped away from anything that could pin it down. I started thinking about that clearing, those sticks, the blackened stones, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Maybe from the woods, maybe from inside the dam wall. My skin prickled, and I kept the fire roaring that night, needing the light and the heat to push back the shadows creeping in from the edges of the room. A few days later, I decided to take a closer look inside the cabin itself. I borrowed a crowbar from the hardware store in town, had to convince the clerk I wasn't planning to break anything valuable, and waited until daylight to start poking around. I wasn't about to pry into that wall at night, not after the way the tapping had escalated. It had woken me up at 3 a.m. the night before, sharp and urgent, tap, 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 like someone hammering a fist against the wood, and I'd lain there frozen, staring at the ceiling until it stopped. That was enough for me. I picked a spot near the crack I'd found earlier, wedged the crowbar in, and started pulling. There would splinter with a loud crack, echoing through the cabin, and a chunk of plank came loose, revealing a dark gap. I shined my flashlight inside. Insulation hung in clumps, more cobwebs stretched between the studs, and a narrow space stretched out of sight. No nests, no droppings, nothing alive that I could see. But the air that rushed out was cold, way colder than it should have been for a late fall day. And it carried a smell, sharp, metallic, like old pennies or dry blood. I reached in with a gloved hand, feeling around despite the goosebumps crawling up my arm. My fingers brushed something hard and smooth, tucked behind the insulation, wedged against a stud. I pulled it out, a small, flat stone about the size of my palm, etched with a crude spiral that twisted inward toward a jagged center. It wasn't natural. Someone had carved it, the lines too deliberate to be random weathering. My heart was racing as I turned it over my hands, the surface cool and slick under my. One night, about a week ago, it got worse. The tapping started at midnight, late for its usual pattern, and it didn't stop. Tap, 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 tap. It went on for hours, steady and unrelenting, like a heartbeat in the wood. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed the crowbar, tore the plywood off completely, and shone my light inside. The gap was wider now, the insulation hanging in tatters, and I saw it again, a shadow, sharper this time, moving across the space between the studs. It wasn't a hand. It was bigger, a silhouette that flickered and vanished when I blinked. My throat went dry, my legs locked up, and I dropped the crowbar with a clang that echoed through the cabin. The tapping stopped instantly, like I'd startled it, and the silence that followed was deafening, heavy with something I couldn't name. I nailed the plywood back up that night, my hands shaking so bad I missed the nails half the time. I didn't sleep, just sat there, knife on my lap, listening to my own breathing, waiting for dawn. The next day, I drove into town, bought a padlock, and rigged it onto the front door, adding a chain for good measure. It's not like that'll stop whatever's in the wall, but it makes me feel better, gives me something to do with my hands. I've started avoiding the bedroom altogether, sleeping on the couch, closer to the stove, closer to the door in case I need to run. The whispers are louder now, or maybe I'm just noticing them more, soft hisses that rise and fall, like voices arguing a language I don't know. They come from the wall, from the ceiling, sometimes from the floor under my feet, and I can't tell if they're real or if I'm losing it. I've thought about calling someone else, a friend, maybe, or the cops. But what would I say? Hey, my cabin's haunted by tapping and shadows. They'd laugh, or they'd think I'm cracking up, and maybe I am. I call Hal one more time, left a voicemail when he didn't pick up, my voice shaking as I begged him to come back, to check the attic, the crawl space, anything. He hasn't called back, and I don't expect him to. I've looked at the cabin online, tried to dig into its history, but there's nothing, just a rental listing from years ago. A blurry photo of the porch. No mentions of tenants or weird stories. The woods are too big, too old, to give up their secrets to a search engine. Yesterday, I found something else. I was sweeping the porch, trying to keep busy, when I noticed scratches on the back wall. Faint lines in the siding, like someone dragged a nail or a claw across it. They weren't there before, I'm sure of it. I'd checked that wall a dozen times. They're shallow, uneven, running in a jagged spiral that matches the stone's carving almost exactly. My stomach twisted, and I dropped the broom, backing inside and locking the door. The tapping started an hour later. Tap, 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 and I swear it sounded closer, like it was right behind the plywood, inches from my head. I didn't look. I couldn't. I don't know what's in these woods or what's in this cabin. Maybe it's nothing, just my mind cracking under the isolation, the endless quiet pressing in until I see and hear things that aren't there. Maybe it's something older, something tied to that stone, those twigs, the blackened ring in the clearing. Something that's been here longer than the cabin, longer than me. All I know is the tapping hasn't stopped. And every night I sit here, waiting for it to start again, the knife in my hand, the stone on the table, the whispers curling around me like smoke. It's a rhythm now, part of my life, and I can't shake the sense that it's waiting for me to do something, answer it, maybe, or let it in. But I don't know how, and I'm not sure I want to find out. For now, I stay, locked in this little box of wood in fear, listening to the walls, wonder what they're trying to tell me, and how long I can hold out before they don't need me to answer anymore. Story 3. I moved into the house on a cold October afternoon, the kind of day when the sky is an endless stretch of gray, and the wind carries a biting chill that seeps into your bones. The house stood at the end of a quiet street, its black shutters slightly crooked, its wooden porch warped from years of weather. It wasn't my dream home, but it was what I could afford. The moving truck had already left, leaving me alone with stacks of boxes and the echo of my own footsteps. The air inside smelled faintly of old wood and something else. Something stale and musty, like a room that had been locked away for too long. The house had been vacant for years before I signed the lease. The landlord, an older man with a permanent frown, handed me the keys with little more than a grunt. "You sure you want this place?" he had asked, not in a warning tone, but as if he genuinely couldn't understand why anyone would choose to live here. I shrugged. "It's within my budget." "Guess that's one way to look at it," he muttered before shuffling away. Now, standing in the empty living room, I exhaled, pushing away the creeping sense of unease. It was just an old house, nothing more. I started unpacking, moving from one room to the next, trying to make the space feel like mine. The house was larger than I needed. 2 floors, 3 bedrooms, a basement I had no intention of using. The previous tenants had left in a hurry, judging by the few abandoned items in the attic. An old rocking chair, a dust-covered mirror, a box filled with brittle, yellowed papers. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, I was exhausted. I ordered takeout from the only nearby restaurant that delivered and sat on the floor of the living room, eating straight from a container. The wind howled outside, rattling windows. Every now and then, I thought I heard something shift upstairs, but I chalked it up to the house settling. It was an old place. Old places made noises. That night, as I lay in bed, the silence felt heavier than it should have. I tried to sleep, but every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind against the walls, made me flinch. At some point, I must have drifted off because I woke up to the sound of something scratching. A slow, deliberate scraping. It was coming from inside the walls. I held my breath, listening. The sound moved, a faint scuttling, like something small was trapped within the wooden panels. Mice, I told myself. Just mice. But as I closed my eyes again, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The next morning, I met my neighbor, a woman in her late 50s who introduced herself as Mrs. Thompson. She wore a thick cardigan despite the mild weather, and her gray hair was pulled back into a tight bun. "You're the new tenant," she said, studying me with sharp eyes. "Yeah, just moved in yesterday." She nodded, lips pursed. "You plan on staying long?" The question caught me off guard. I don't know yet." "Why?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "No reason." just curious. There was something in her tone that put me on edge. Did the last tenants leave in a hurry? I asked, hoping she might know. Her gaze flickered to my house before she lowered her voice. A young couple lived there before you. They were nice, quiet. Then one night, they packed up and left. Never said goodbye. Just vanished. I frowned. Vanished. She sighed. People don't like talking about that house, dear. Not after everything that's happened. A cold sensation crept up my spine. What do you mean? She hesitated again, as if debating whether to tell me. Finally, she sighed. Strange things happen there. Always have. The house doesn't like people staying too long. I let out a nervous laugh. Well, that's comforting. Her face remained serious. If you hear anything at night, don't go looking for it. Before I could ask what she meant, she turned and walked away. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Mrs. Thompson's words playing over my head. If you hear anything at night, don't go looking for it. Around 2 a.m., the house shifted, groaning like an old ship lost at sea. I rolled onto my side, pulling the blanket tighter around me. Then, just as I was about to fall asleep, I heard it again, the scratching. Slow, deliberate, closer this time. And underneath it, something else. A whisper, a voice, faint and distant, like it was coming from inside the walls. Let me out. I bolted upright, my heart hammering against my ribs. I wasn't alone in this house. Not anymore. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. My body ached, my head felt heavy, and there was a deep, lingering unease in my chest. The memory of that whisper clung to me like a shadow, playing over and over my mind. Let me out. I tried to convince myself that I had imagined it. Maybe I was dreaming. Maybe the exhaustion from moving had gotten to me. But when I sat up and looked around the room, I noticed something that hadn't been there the night before. The closet door was open, just a crack. I stared at it, my breath catching in my throat. I always closed my closet doors. Always. The thought of sleeping with them even slightly open made my skin crawl. And yet, there it was, the thin sliver of darkness between the door and the frame, like an invitation. I forced myself to move, to swing my legs over the side of the bed and stand. The floor was ice cold beneath my feet. Step by step, I crossed the room, reaching out with a shaky hand. My fingers brushed against the wood, and I hesitated. Then, in one quick motion, I pulled the door wide open. Nothing, just the same empty space, filled with boxes I hadn't unpacked yet. My clothes hung limply on their hangers, swaying slightly from a movement. I exhaled sharply and shut the door, pressing against it for a moment as if to reassure myself that it wasn't going to swing open again. It was just a coincidence. I had left it open without realizing it. That's all. Still, I dressed quickly and left the house as soon as I could. The town was small, the kind of place where people notice a new face immediately. As I walked down the quiet streets, I could feel eyes on me, polite nods and brief glances that lingered just a little too long. I stopped at a small cafe, hoping a cup of coffee would shake off the unease still crawling under my skin. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside. The place was cozy, the scent of roasted beans and fresh pastries filling the air. A few patrons sat at wooden tables, their voices low, their gazes flickering toward me before turning to their conversations. I ordered a coffee and took a seat by the window, watching the street outside. People moved with a certain slowness, like they were carrying the weight of something unseen. You're the one who moved into that house, aren't you? The voice came from the other side of my table. I turned to see an older man with thinning white hair and deep-set eyes watching me over his cup of tea. Yeah, I said cautiously. Why? He took a slow sip before answering. People don't stay there long. I stiffened. So I've heard. He studied me for a moment before setting his cup down. You hear anything yet? I hesitated. What do you mean? A dry chuckle. You'll find out soon enough. A chill ran through me. Before I could ask anything else, the man stood, tossing a few bills on the table before making his way to the door. He didn't look back. I sat there, my hands wrapped around my coffee cup, the warmth doing little to ease a cold growing in my stomach. What the hell had I gotten myself into? By the time I returned home, the sky had darkened with the promise of rain. The air was thick, heavy, the kind of stillness that comes before a storm. I hesitated at the front door, my fingers tightening around the key. A strange feeling settled over me, a quiet warning deep in my gut. Don't go inside. I shook it off and stepped over the threshold, closing the door behind me. The house was silent, too silent, the kind of silence that feels unnatural, like something is waiting just out of sight. I moved through the room slowly, checking each one as if expecting to find something out of place. Everything was exactly as I had left it. The closet door of my bedroom was still shut. I let out a breath and sat on the edge of my bed, running a hand through my hair. I was being paranoid, letting my imagination run wild. Thump. I froze. The sound had come from upstairs. Thump. Louder this time. My heartbeat quickened. The attic, the only part of the house I hadn't fully explored yet. I had gone up there briefly when I moved in, just long enough to see the dust-covered furniture, the old boxes stacked in corners. Nothing worth my attention. But now, something was up there. I stood slowly, every nerve in my body on edge. My feet carried me toward the hallway before I even realized I was moving. The pull of curiosity was stronger than the fear tightening in my chest. The attic door was in the ceiling at the end of the hall, a simple wooden panel with a pull-down ladder. I reached up, fingers brushing against the cold metal latch, and pulled. The ladder creaked as it unfolded. The opening above me gaped like a black mouth. I hesitated. Then, swallowing hard, I climbed. The air in the attic was stale, thick with dust and the scent of aged wood. My footsteps were muffled by the thin layer of grime coating the floor. The single bulb hanging from the ceiling flickered as I pulled the chain, casting weak light over the space. Nothing seemed out of place. I exhaled slowly, shaking my head at myself. Just the house settling. Just my nerves playing tricks on me. Then I saw it, in the far corner, where the light barely reached. Something had changed. A wooden chest sat against the wall, one I hadn't paid much attention to before. But now, the lid was open, and inside, something moved. A scratching sound, faint but insistent. I took a slow step forward. The air felt heavier, pressing against my skin, filling my lungs with something thick and suffocating. Another step. A whisper rose in the chest, low and urgent, the words just barely audible. Let me out. I stumbled back, my breath catching my throat. The whisper grew louder, more desperate. Please, let me out. The lid shifted, creaking as if something inside was trying to push it open. I turned and ran, nearly tripping down the attic ladder, slamming the panel shut behind me. My hands trembled as I locked my bedroom door, pressing my back against it, my heart hammering against my ribs. The house was silent again, but I knew, deep in my bones, that whatever was in that chest, it wasn't done with me. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard it again, the whisper, the soft, pleading voice curling into darkness like smoke. Let me out. The words dug into my mind, twisting and turning, refusing to leave me in peace. I told myself it wasn't real. It was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Very, very wrong. I lay there for hours, staring at the ceiling, listening. Every creak, every distant groan of the old house sent a shiver down my spine. The wind rattled the windows. A branch scraped against the side of the house. Underneath all of that, there was something else. A steady rhythmic sound. Scratch, 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 coming from above. The attic. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to breathe evenly. It was nothing, just a rat, or the wind shifting things around. But deep down, I knew better. That chest, that voice, something was in there, and it wanted out. I didn't move until the first light of dawn bled through the curtains. My body ached from how stiffly I had lain. Every muscle coiled tight, like a wound spring. The scratching had stopped sometime in the night, but the silence it left behind was worse. I forced myself to get up, to go about my morning like everything was fine. I made coffee. I took a shower. I tried not to look at the ceiling, afraid I'd hear something I didn't want to, but the feeling of being watched never left. By the time I stepped outside, the air was thick with the promise of rain. The clouds hung low, heavy and dark, pressing down on the town like a weight. I needed to get out of the house, to clear my head, to be around people. I ended up at the library. It was small, quiet, the kind of place that smelled like old books and dust. A few people sat at tables, heads bent over pages, lost in their own worlds. I wandered aimlessly at first, letting my fingers trail over the spines of books, my mind distant. And then I saw it, a section tucked away in the back, barely noticeable. Local history. A strange feeling settled in my chest as I stepped closer, my eyes scanning the titles. Most were about the town's founding, old maps, genealogy records. But one book stood out, the Whitmore House. My breath caught. That was my house. I pulled the book from the shelf, my hand slightly unsteady. The cover was worn, the title faded. I flipped through the pages, scanning for anything that could explain what was happening. And then I found it, an old newspaper clipping, taped onto one of the pages. The headline sent a chill down my spine. Local man disappears without a trace. There was a picture, a grainy black and white image of a man standing in front of my house. He looked normal enough, mid-30s, sharp features, a solemn expression. But his eyes, there was something off about them, a kind of hollow emptiness, like he had already seen something he wished he hadn't. The article was brief. Edward Whitmore, last known resident of the Whitmore House, was reported missing in 1978. Neighbors claimed he'd been acting strangely in the weeks leading up to his disappearance, speaking of whispers in the night and strange movements in the attic. My stomach turned. He had heard it too. The article went on to say that the police searched the house but found no sign of forced entry, no sign of struggle. It was as if he had simply vanished. The only thing they found was a note, scrawled in shaky handwriting. Don't open the chest. A cold sweat broke out over my skin. I slammed the book shut and shoved it back onto the shelf, my heart pounding. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of joke. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I left the library in a daze, the words repeating over and over in my head. Don't open the chest. But I already had. I barely remember the drive home. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. The house loomed ahead, dark and silent, waiting. I didn't want to go inside, but I had no choice. The air inside was stale, the kind of stillness that felt unnatural. I locked the door behind me, listening. Nothing, just silence. But it didn't comfort me. I needed to check. My body felt like it was moving on its own as I walked toward the hallway. Every step felt heavier, my legs stiff, my breath shallow. I reached the attic ladder, staring up at the wooden panel in the ceiling. For a long moment, I just stood there. Then, slowly, I reached up and pulled the ladder down. It unfolded with a groan, revealing the black mouth of the attic above. The air was colder here. I could feel it seeping down from the darkness, curling around me like fingers. I climbed. The bulb overhead flickered as I pulled the chain. The dim light cast long shadows over the space, making everything feel distorted. My gaze snapped a corner. The chest was open wider than before. Not fully, just an inch or two, like something had tried to push it open but hadn't finished the job. A shudder ran through me. I swallowed hard, stepping closer. The air grew heavier with each step, thick and pressing, making it harder to breathe. I knelt beside the chest, my fingers hovering over the edge, and then the lid snapped open on its own. A scream stuck in my throat as a wave of icy air burst from the chest, so cold it burned my skin. And inside, nothing. It was empty, but the whisper was right beside my ear now. Thank you. The attic light flickered violently, plunging the room into darkness. I stumbled back, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Then, from the shadows, something moved, a shape rising from the empty chest, stretching unnaturally, unfolding like a broken puppet. I turned and ran. I didn't look back. I didn't stop. I stumbled down the attic ladder, barely managing to slam the panel shut behind me. My hand shook as I locked it, my breath coming in sharp, panicked bursts. The silence pressed in again, but it wasn't normal silence. It was the kind that listens, the kind that waits. And then, a single knock from inside the attic. Slow, deliberate. I backed away, my entire body trembling. My mind screamed at me to leave, to get out of the house and never come back. But before I could move, I heard it again. A whisper, not from the attic this time. From right behind me. Let me out. I ran. I don't remember making the decision. My body just reacted, legs moving before my mind could catch up. I bolted down the hallway, heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode. The walls blurred past me, the air thick and suffocating. But the whisper followed. Let me out. Right behind me, right against my ear. I stumbled into the living room, hands shaking as I fumbled with the lock on the front door. My fingers felt useless, clumsy, slipping over the cold metal. The whisper came again, closer this time. You shouldn't have opened it. I twisted the lock and yanked the door open. Cold night air rushed in, hitting me like a slap to the face. I didn't stop. I ran down the porch steps, onto the street, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. Only when I was halfway down the block did I finally stop. My lungs burned, my head spun. I turned back, staring at the house. It stood there, dark and silent, watching. The attic window was open. I hadn't opened it. Something was up there, and it was looking down at me. I couldn't see a face, but I felt it. A presence pressing against the glass, hidden just beyond the shadows. A shape shifting in the darkness. I shivered violently. I needed help. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed the first number that came to mind. Travis. I barely knew him, but he was the closest thing I had to a friend in this town. The phone rang once, twice, then his groggy voice answered. Hello. I could barely get the words out. I need help. A pause. Then, suddenly more alert. Are you okay? I can't. My throat felt dry, my tongue thick. I turned away from the house, forcing myself to take a deep breath. I need to get out of here. Can I come over? Another pause. Then, yeah, of course. Are you? I hung up before he could finish. I couldn't stand still any longer. I needed to move, to put as much distance as possible between me and that house. I started walking, my pulse still hammering in my ears. The night was quiet, too quiet. The streetlights cast long shadows, stretching unnaturally across the pavement. Every step I took felt heavier, like something unseen was dragging me down. And then, for the first time since I left the house, I heard footsteps, not mine. Behind me, I froze. My breath caught in my throat. The footsteps stopped too. Slowly, I turned my head. Nothing. The street was empty. The houses dark. The trees swayed gently in the wind. But the feeling didn't leave. That awful, gut-deep certainty that something was there. Something was watching me. I started walking again. Faster. The footsteps followed. My skin prickled. I clenched my fists, forcing myself not to run. Running would make it worse. Running would let it know I was afraid. And I was terrified. Travis's house was only a few blocks away. I could see the porch light glowing in the distance, a small beacon in the suffocating dark. I just had to make it there. The footsteps quickened. So did mine. By the time I reached his front steps, I was nearly sprinting. I banged on the door, my hand trembling. It flew open almost instantly. Travis stood there, looking confused, concern etched on his face. Jesus, you look like you've seen a ghost. I pushed past him, stepping inside, needing to be anywhere but outside. The moment the door shut behind me, I finally let out a breath. Talk to me, Travis said, his voice softer now. What happened? I shook my head, pacing the living room, running my hands through my hair. How could I even explain this? It sounded insane. I opened a chest in my attic, And now something's whispering to me. I don't know. I finally muttered. Something's wrong with that house. Travis frowned. What do you mean? I swallowed hard. I think it's haunted. He didn't laugh. He didn't roll his eyes or call me crazy. Instead, he just watched me carefully, waiting. So I told him everything. The strange noises, the whispers, the chest, the name Edward Whitmore, the article in the library, the thing that had moved in the attic. By the time I finished, my hands were cold, my entire body tense. Travis exhaled slowly. Shit. Yeah. For a moment, he was quiet. Then he stood, walking to the bookshelf in the corner of the room. He pulled out a book, flipping to the pages before handing it to me. I stared down at it. The title sent a shiver through me. The Whitmore Curse. My mouth went dry. Where did you get this? My grandmother used to tell stories about that house, Travis said, sinking back into his chair. Most people thought she was just superstitious. But I don't know. Some of the stuff she said was weirdly specific. I flipped through the pages, my pulse hammering. The book was old, filled with handwritten notes in the margins. And then I saw it, a passage about Edward Whitmore, a man obsessed with the occult, a man who performed rituals to contact something beyond this world, a man who, according to legend, opened a door he couldn't close. The final entry made my stomach turn. He let it out, and now it waits, watching, listening, for the next one to open the chest. My vision blurred. My skin felt too tight, my breath shallow. I had opened the chest. I had let it out. I looked up at Travis, my voice barely above a whisper. What do I do? His expression was grim. I don't know. But then from outside, a single, deliberate knock on the door. I went rigid. Travis frowned, standing. Who the hell? The second knock came. Slow, heavy. Travis moved toward the door. I wanted to scream at him to stop, to tell him not to open it. But my throat had closed up. I could only watch, frozen in place, as he reached the knob. The third knock echoed through the house. And then, the whisper, "Let me in." Travis hesitated, his hand hovering over the doorknob. His eyes flicked to me, a question forming on his lips, but I couldn't answer. I couldn't move. My body felt locked in place, every muscle frozen as the air around us thickened. Another knock, slow, measured. Knock, knock, knock. The sound vibrated through the house, deeper than it should have been, as if something massive stood on the other side of that thin wooden door. Travis swallowed. Who is it? His voice was steady, but I could hear the edge of unease creeping in. Silence. Then, just as I thought the knocking had stopped, a whisper right against the door. "Let me in." The words crawled through the room, slipping under my skin like ice water. They weren't loud, but they filled every inch of space, pressing against my ears, my chest, my mind. Travis took a step back. What the hell? The doorknob rattled. Not a knock this time. A deliberate twist, slow and insistent. Something was trying to get in. "Don't open it," I whispered. My voice barely worked, a thin, breathless sound. Travis gave me a look, a flicker of confusion mixed with growing fear. He didn't ask why. He didn't argue. He just nodded, taking another step back. The rattling stopped. Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. The only sound was my own heartbeat, slamming against my ribs. Then, tap, a soft, almost gentle sound against the window. I turned my head, my stomach lurching. The curtains were drawn, but I could see the shape behind them. Tall, still, waiting. The air in the room grew colder. Travis let out a shaky breath. What the hell is that? I couldn't answer. My eyes were locked on the window, on the shifting shadow behind the fabric. It wasn't moving, but I could feel it staring. Another tap. Then a whisper. "You open the chest." The breath left my lungs in a sharp, painful gasp. The thing outside knew, and it was here for me. Travis grabbed my arm. "We need to call someone." My voice came out hoarse. "The cops." He hesitated. We both knew how that would go. We'd tell them a shadow was whispering through the door and tapping on the windows, and they'd either think we were insane or send a patrol car that wouldn't find anything. We were on our own. The whisper came again, curling through the room like smoke. You let me out. Now let me in. The lights flickered. I clenched my fists, nails biting into my palms. I didn't mean to, I said, barely more than a breath. The whisper was closer now. Doesn't matter. Travis grabbed his phone, his fingers shaking as he pulled up a number. I know someone, he muttered. Just give me a second. I nodded, but my eyes stayed on the window. The shape was gone. A cold dread filled my stomach. And then, from the hallway, a creak, the floorboards, inside the house. Travis froze, phone halfway to his ear. His eyes darted to me, wide with fear. The whisper came again, not from the door, not from the window, from the hallway. I'm inside. A slow, heavy breath against my ear. I spun around. Nothing, but the hallway was darker than before. The shadows stretched longer, deeper, reaching out like fingers, and in the center of it, a shape, not quite solid, not quite human, tall, thin, with arms that seemed too long, fingers that curled slightly, twitching. The air around it seemed wrong, shifting in and out of focus, as if it wasn't fully in this world. Its head tilted, a slow, unnatural movement. The whisper came again, slipping between my ears like a cold breath. Let me out. My body locked up. My mind screamed at me to move, to run, to do anything, but I couldn't. I could only stare as it stepped closer. The floorboards groaned beneath it, the wood bending unnaturally, like the house itself was recoiling. Travis made a choke sound behind me. The thing took another step. I could see its face now. No eyes, no mouth, just a smooth, pale stretch of skin where features should have been. But I could feel it staring, feel its gaze pressing into me, heavy and wrong. It reached out, and suddenly, Travis yanked me back. Move, he shouted. The spell broke. My legs worked again. We bolted through the living room, down the hall, slamming into the kitchen. Travis fumbled with the back door, yanking it open. Cold air rushed in. We stumbled out into the night, breath coming in ragged gasps. We didn't stop running. Not until we were halfway down the street. Only then did we turn back. The house stood silent, dark, empty, but the attic window, it was open, and the whisper followed us into the night. Let me out. We didn't go back that night. Travis drove us to a 24-hour diner on the edge of town, the kind with flickering neon signs and the smell of burnt coffee hanging in the air. We sat in a corner booth, staring at our untouched cups, our hands still shaking. Neither of us spoke for a long time. The weight of what had happened pressed down on us, thick and suffocating. I kept expecting to hear that whisper again, curling to the stale air of the diner. Let me out, but it didn't come. Still I felt it, lingering, watching. Travis finally broke the silence. We can't go back there. I rubbed a hand over my face. I know, but we need to figure out what the hell is going on. He leaned forward, voice low. That thing, whatever it is, it's tied to that house. And it knew. I swallowed. Knew what? His jaw tightened. About the chest. About you opening it. The words sent a fresh wave of unease crawling up my spine. That thing had been whispering to me before. In my dreams. In the house. And now it was free. Someone has to know something, Travis said. This isn't just some ghost story. That house. Someone lived there before you. Someone found that chest before you. The thought made my stomach clench. If they had, where were they now? I looked at Travis. Who were you trying to call back in the house? He hesitated, then pulled out his phone. A friend. Sort of. His name's Bishop. He looks into weird stuff. Paranormal, occult, that kind of thing. Like a ghost hunter? Travis gave a half shrug. More like a guy who gets called when people don't know what else to do. I stared at him. And you know him how? Another pause. He helped me with something once. His voice was quieter now. I wanted to press him for more, but the look in his eyes told me not to. Instead, I nodded. Call him. Travis didn't argue. He dialed, pressing the phone to his ear. A moment later, I heard the click of someone answering. A deep, gravelly voice. Yeah. Travis exhaled. Bishop, it's Travis. I need your help. A pause. Then, you back in town? Yeah. Thought you said you weren't coming back. Didn't plan to... Silence. Then, a shift in the man's tone. What's going on? Travis glanced at me. It's bad. Another pause. Then, where are you? Travis told him. Bishop showed up 20 minutes later. He didn't look like what I expected. No long coat, no old books, no ghost hunting gadgets. Just a tall guy in his 40s, wearing a worn leather jacket, dark jeans, and a permanent look of exhaustion. His hair was buzzed short, streaked with gray, and his eyes, sharp, calculating, studied me like he already knew too much. He slid into the booth across from us. Talk. Travis didn't waste time. He told him everything. The house, the chest, the whispers, the shape in the dark, the thing that got inside. Bishop listened without interrupting, fingers tapping lightly on the table. When Travis finally finished, he let out a slow breath. Shit, he muttered. That bad. I asked. He gave me a look. You let something out, and now it wants in. I gritted my teeth. I didn't mean to. Doesn't matter, Bishop said, echoing the whisper I'd heard in the house. He leaned back, rubbing a hand over his jaw. What did the chest look like? I described it. The carvings, the strange metal, the symbols I didn't recognize. Bishop's expression darkened. You still have it? I hesitated. It's in the house. We need to get it. Travis shook his head. Not happening. That thing, whatever it is, it's in there. Bishop's gaze was steady. Then we have to be fast. I didn't like this plan. Every instinct screamed at me to stay away from that house. But something told me Bishop was right. If we left that chest behind, whatever was tied to it would never stop. It would keep whispering, keep waiting, and eventually it would find a way in. We left the diner an hour before sunrise. The drive back to the house was silent, tense. Every mile felt like a step closer to something we shouldn't be facing. When we pulled up to the curb, the house stood there, dark and still. But something was wrong. The attic window, the one that had been open when we ran, was closed, and every single light in the house was on. Bishop killed the engine. Stay close, he said. We stepped out. The air was colder than before, thick with something I couldn't name. The street was dead quiet. No wind, no distant cars. The house was waiting. Travis swallowed hard. Are we really doing this? Bishop didn't answer. He just walked forward. I followed, every step heavier than the last. When we reached the front porch, I half expected the door to be locked. It wasn't. It swung open the moment Bishop touched the handle. A gust of air rushed past us, like the house was exhaling. And somewhere inside, a whisper, not welcome. I shivered. Bishop stepped in first. Then Travis. Then me. The house smelled different. The old wood and dust were still there, but beneath it, something sour, rotten. The lights flickered as we moved through the hall. The floor creaked, but not beneath our feet. Something else was moving. The chest was still in the living room, untouched, closed. I let out a shaky breath. We grab it and go, right? Bishop didn't answer. His gaze was locked on something past me. I turned and felt my stomach drop. The attic door was open, and at the top of the stairs, a shape stood in the darkness. Tall, still, watching. Then the door slammed shut, and the lights went out. The whisper came again. Too late. The house swallowed us whole. Darkness wrapped around us like thick, suffocating tar. I couldn't see my own hands in front of me. Couldn't tell where Travis or Bishop were. Then came the sound. A slow, deliberate creak from the attic stairs. Something was coming down. Nobody moved, Bishop whispered. His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it. Something sharp, something controlled. I clamped a hand over my mouth, trying to silence my breathing. The air around me was thick and damp, carrying the faint scent of decay. Another step, then another. The floor groaned under an unseen weight. And then, whispers. Not one, but many layered voices, speaking over each other, slithering through the dark like tendrils of smoke. "Help us. Let me out. Please. Don't listen. Shut your eyes," Bishop muttered. I squeezed them shut. The air shifted. Something passed between us, just inches away, so close I felt the chill bite into my skin. My body trembled. I could hear my own pulse hammering inside my skull. Then, silence. No creaking steps. No whispers. Nothing. Bishop exhaled. "Okay, we move fast." Travis, flashlight. A sharp click, and a narrow beam of light cut through the darkness. The living room materialized around us, distorted by deep shadows. The attic door was closed, but something had changed. The chest. It was open and empty. A cold weight settled in my stomach. No. Bishop moved forward, shining the light inside. Nothing. Just the hollow space where the thing had been sealed away. "We need to go," Travis muttered. Bishop didn't move. He stared at the chest, his jaw tightening. "It's out." A faint noise echoed through the house. Not footsteps this time. Something else. Scraping. Slow. Deliberate. Where is it coming from? I whispered. Travis swept the light across the room. The walls. The ceiling. The hall. The beam landed on the basement door. It was open just a crack. The scraping sound came again. From below. "That wasn't open before," Travis said. No one needed to say it. We all knew. Something wanted us to go down there. "We don't," I whispered. "Right." Bishop's grip tightened on the flashlight. Then the basement door slammed open. A rush of freezing air hit us, smelling of damp earth and something sour. The scraping stopped. And then, a voice. Not a whisper. Not layered. Something clear. Low. Rough. And far too human. "Come see." I didn't think. I just ran. Travis was right behind me, cursing under his breath as we tore through the house. I hit the front door at full speed, yanking it open, and nearly fell forward. Outside was black. Not night, not a street. Just nothing. My breath hitched. Travis grabbed my arm, jerking me back before I could fall into the void. "What the hell?" Bishop's voice cut through. "It's not real." I turned. He stood near the basement door, unmoving, staring. His face was pale. Travis yanked the door shut, locking it. "I don't care if it's real or not. We're not going down there." But Bishop didn't move. Something was wrong. His flashlight trembled slightly in his grip. His breathing was slow, too controlled. "Bishop?" His jaw clenched. "It knows me." The room felt colder. "What does?" I asked. Bishop didn't answer. The whispers started again, but this time they were laughing. The laughter seeped into my bones. It wasn't coming from one voice. It was many, a tangled mess of chuckles, wheezes, and guttural snickers. Some sounded like children. Others were deep, rasping, as if they had been laughing for centuries and had forgotten how to stop. Bishop still hadn't moved. Travis grabbed his arm. "We have to go, now." Bishop didn't even blink. The light from his flashlight flickered, the beam trembling against the walls. I took a step closer. "Bishop!" His head snapped toward me, so fast it made my stomach lurch. But it wasn't him. His eyes were wrong. Too dark, too deep, as if something else was looking out through them. The laughter grew louder. "Bishop!" I whispered. His lips moved. I almost didn't hear him over the noise. "Don't listen." Then he jerked forward, slamming into me, knocking the flashlight from my hands. The room went dark. I hit the floor hard, the breath leaving my lungs in a sharp gasp. Bishop was on top of me, his hands pressing against my shoulders. No, not his hands. They were cold. Cold. Too many fingers. I struggled, pushing against the weight pinning me down. Bishop. He wasn't speaking anymore. The The thing wearing his skin leaned in, its breath like rotting leaves and stagnant water. "You see now," it whispered. Then, a blinding beam of light. Travis. He had grabbed a fallen flashlight and aimed it directly at Bishop's face. The thing recoiled, letting out a shriek so sharp it rattled my skull. I scrambled backward as Bishop staggered, clutching his head. Then, he dropped. His body hit the floor like a puppet with its strings cut. The laughter stopped. Silence. Only our ragged breathing remained. Travis kept the flashlight trained on Bishop's motionless body. "Is he?" Bishop's fingers twitched. Then, slowly, he pushed himself up. His face was pale. His eyes normal again. But he looked hollow. "Move," he said hoarsely. Travis and I hesitated. Bishop didn't look at us. He just grabbed the flashlight from Travis's shaking hands and turned toward the basement door. It was open again, wider this time. A dark staircase yawned below, disappearing into blackness. The whispers had returned, but now they were different. Not laughing, chanting. Bishop took a step forward. "Bishop, wait," I started. He stopped but didn't turn around. "They won't stop," he said. His voice sounded tired. "Not until we finish this." Travis shook his head. "No way. That thing had you, man. We're not going down there." Bishop turned slightly, just enough for me to see the expression on his face. "They let me go," he said, "because they want you instead." My stomach twisted. "What?" Bishop exhaled slowly. "They know you can hear them now." A chill ran down my spine. Travis looked between us. "What the hell does that mean?" Bishop's grip on the flashlight tightened. "It means it won't let him leave." I felt it then. The pull, like invisible fingers curling around my ribs, holding me in place. The house had me. I swallowed hard. "Then what do we do?" Bishop turned fully now, his face set with grim determination. "We end it." Then, without another word, he stepped into basement. The darkness swallowed him whole. I didn't want to follow, but I knew I had no choice. Travis and I exchanged a look. Then we stepped forward together, and the door slammed shut behind us. The door slammed shut, so hard it rattled the walls. Total darkness. For a second, all I could hear was our breathing. My own heartbeat thudded in my ears, too fast, too loud. Then, a single creak. Bishop's flashlight beam flickered on, cutting through the blackness. The air was thick, heavy with dust, but something else too. A weight, a presence. We were in a basement, but it didn't feel like one. The walls were damp, covered in something dark. Mold? No, the smell was worse than mold. It was thick, metallic, like rusted iron, and something more rotten beneath it. Travis inhaled sharply. "This place feels wrong." He wasn't exaggerating. It was colder down here. Not the kind of cold that made you shiver, but the kind that sank deep into your bones, into your chest, filling your lungs with something heavy and unnatural. Bishop kept moving. The flashlight wavered as he stepped forward, revealing more of the basement. It wasn't just a room. It was a tunnel. A narrow hallway stretched ahead, disappearing into the dark. "This shouldn't be here," I muttered. Travis swallowed. "No kidding." The chanting was clearer now. Low, rhythmic. Words I didn't understand, but they crawled under my skin, made my scalp prickle. Bishop didn't hesitate. He stepped deeper into the tunnel, the light bouncing off wet stone walls. I hesitated. I didn't want to go forward, but I didn't want to be alone either. Travis nudged me. "Come on, man. I'm not standing here by myself." I took a breath and followed. The deeper we went, the colder it got. The walls were wrong. They weren't part of the original house. This was older, much older. The stones looked ancient, rough-hewn, and covered in strange carvings, symbols I didn't recognize. And the deeper we went, the stronger the smell got. Rot, like something had died down here. The flashlight flickered again. Bishop hissed under his breath. Then the walls shifted. Or at least, that's what it looked like. The carvings. They moved. I blinked, my stomach twisting. No, it wasn't the walls. Something was behind them. Something breathing. I grabbed Bishop's arm. "Do you see that?" He didn't answer. He just kept walking. Travis cursed under his breath. I swear to God, if something jumps out at me, I'm punching in the face. His attempt at humor fell flat. No one was laughing. We weren't alone. Something was here, watching. The chanting grew louder. And then we reached the end of the tunnel. A door, massive wooden, covered in deep scratches. Not carvings, scratches. Like something had tried to claw its way out. Or in. Bishop lifted the flashlight. There was a single word etched into the wood. A name. Rowan. Travis frowned. What the hell is Rowan? Bishop didn't answer. He reached for the handle. Wait. I started. Too late. The door swung open. Cold air rushed out, thick with the stench of decay. Inside, a room. Small. Circular. And in the center, a chair. An old wooden chair, with leather straps hanging from the arms. Something sat in it. A shape. Human, but wrong. Its skin was dried, stretched too tight over bone. Its head hung forward, black hair obscuring its face. The chanting stopped. Silence. I took a step back. Nope. Nope. We're done. We are so done. Bishop didn't move. He stared at the figure in the chair. Rowan. Travis stiffened. Dude, don't say its name. Too late. The figure moved. Its head lifted, hair falling away. The face beneath. No eyes. Just hollow sockets. Dark and endless. Its mouth sewn shut. It raised a hand. Not fast. Not aggressive. Just slow. Deliberate. Like it was reaching for us. Then, in a voice that wasn't a voice. A whisper inside my head. You should not be here. And then, the lights went out. The darkness swallowed us whole. A crushing, suffocating blackness. So thick I couldn't even see my own hands. Then, a sound. A soft, wet snap, like something breaking apart. Then another, and another. The whisper came again, curling inside my skull, wrapping around my thoughts. Asterisk, you should not be here. Asterisk, I stumbled backward, slamming into the cold stone wall. Bishop, Travis. No answer, only breathing. Ragged, shallow. Then, a click. Bishop's flashlight flared back to life. The chair, empty. The thing that had been sitting in it, gone. My chest tightened. My stomach twisted. Where is it? No one answered. Bishop turned in slow, shaking circles, sweeping the light across the room. Nothing. No footprints. No shadows. Just the smell. Worse now, like something old and rotting had been stirred up from the dirt, releasing centuries of decay into the air. Then, a creak. Behind us. We all turned at the same time. The door, still open, but something stood there now. Not a person. Not exactly. It was thin, so thin I could see the sharp edges of bone pressing against pale, waxy skin. Its arms were too long, fingers tipped with blackened nails. And its face. It didn't have one. Just skin, stretched smooth where its eyes and mouth should have been. But it saw us. I knew it did. It took a step forward. The floor groaned beneath its weight. Then another step. Bishop's flashlight flickered. I grabbed his arm. We have to go. Travis was already moving, backpedaling toward the door. Screw this. We are not dying down here. The thing took another step, then stopped. It tilted its head like it was listening. Then it whispered, not out loud, inside my head. Asterisk, who will stay? Asterisk. A shudder ripped through me. No one. We're leaving. Its head twitched. Then it moved. Fast. A blur of motion. Too quick for something that looked so fragile. It was between us and the door in an instant. Bishop lifted the flashlight. The beam hit its skin, and the shadows twisted. Like it wasn't standing in the light at all. Like it swallowed the light. A deep, gnawing cold sank into my chest. Travis grabbed my arm. We run on 3. I nodded, not trusting my voice. 1. The thing's head twitched again. 2. Its fingers cracked, joints bending the wrong way. 3. We bolted. Bishop hit the door first. shoving past it into the tunnel. Travis and I followed, sprinting through the darkness. The walls blurred around us, the smell of rot growing stronger. Behind us, the whisper, asterisk, you cannot leave, asterisk, the tunnel shifted. I felt it like something was closing in, the walls narrowing, the air thickening, pressing against us. Bishop tripped. I grabbed him, yanking him up. Move! Travis was ahead of us now, feet pounding against the damp stone. The stairs. I saw them, the light from the basement. We were close. Then a hand grabbed my ankle. Ice shot through my leg. I hit the ground hard, my head slamming into the cold stone. The air knocked from my lungs. I twisted, kicking wildly. The thing's fingers locked tighter. Cold, burning. My vision blurred. Travis grabbed me. Come on. He yanked. The fingers slipped away. I scrambled to my feet, sprinting up the stairs 2 at a time. Bishop was already at the top, throwing his weight against the door. It wouldn't open. Travis hit it next. Still nothing. I slammed into it with him, all of us shoving, pushing. The whisper curled around us. Colder than death. Asterisk, you will stay. Asterisk. Then the door burst open. We stumbled through, crashing onto the basement floor. The second we were out, the door slammed shut behind us. Bishop swung the flashlight back. The tunnel, gone. Just a wall. No door. No passage. Like it had never been there at all. Silence. Then a knock from inside the wall. Slow. Steady. A rhythm. And a whisper just beneath it. Asterisk. One of you still belongs to me. Asterisk. We ran. Straight out of the basement. Out of the house. Into the cold night air. We didn't stop running. Not until the house was a distant shadow behind us. Not until my lungs burned and my legs nearly gave out. And even then, I swore I could still hear the knocking. Slow, steady, waiting. The knocking stayed with me. Even after we were far from the house. Even after we collapsed in the car, shaking and gasping for breath. I could still hear it. Soft, measured, like a patient heartbeat against the walls of my skull. Bishop turned the key. The engine coughed once, twice, then roared to life. He yanked the gear shift into reverse, peeling out of the driveway so fast the tires screamed against the pavement. No one spoke. No one could. We didn't stop driving until we hit town. The gas station was the first place we found. Bright fluorescent lights. Open 24 hours. A teenage cashier inside, chewing gum and staring at his phone like nothing in the world could touch him. We sat in the car for a long time, just breathing. Travis was the first to break the silence. We're not telling anyone about this. Bishop let out a dry, humorless laugh. Who the hell would believe us? He was right. I didn't even believe us. But my ankle still burned where it had grabbed me, and my mind kept going back to that whisper. Asterisk, one of you still belongs to me. Asterisk. I shook it off, running my hands down my face. We should leave town, first thing tomorrow. No one argued. We went inside, grabbed coffee and snacks, sat at the back booth of an all-night diner, and tried to convince ourselves that what happened hadn't really happened. That it was just an old house, a dark basement, our minds playing tricks on us. By the time the sun started to rise, none of us had slept. We agreed to meet later in the afternoon, grab our things, and get out of town. It should have been that easy. It should have been over. But when I got back to my motel room, the door was unlocked. I was sure I had locked it. My heart stuttered. I stepped inside, slow, careful. The room looked normal, exactly how I had left it, but the air felt wrong. Still, heavy, like the silence was waiting. I checked every corner. The closet, the bathroom, under the bed. Nothing. I let out a breath, shaking my head at myself. Paranoid idiot. I locked the door, bolted it, chain latched it. Then I tossed my duffel bag onto the bed and collapsed beside it, exhausted. But before my eyes even shut, a sound. Not loud, not obvious, but enough. A whisper of fabric, like someone shifting their weight on the chair in the corner. My stomach twisted. I forced myself to look. The chair was empty, but I hadn't left it facing the bed. I was sure of it, and now it was. My breath shuddered out of me. I reached for my bag, yanking it open, stuffing my things inside. I wasn't staying. I wasn't risking it. I didn't care if I had to sleep in my car, but when I turned back toward the door, the chain lock was unlatched, the bolt was undone, and the door was open a few inches, just enough for darkness to seep in from the hallway. Something inside me snapped. I ran, didn't even take my bag, just ran, straight to the diner, heart hammering, lungs burning. Bishop and Travis were already there. I slammed my hands on the table, voice shaking. It followed us. Bishop paled. What do you mean? I told him about the chair, the door. Travis stared at his coffee, like it held all the answers in the world. It chose one of us. The word sent ice down my spine. Asterisk, one of you still belongs to me. Asterisk. Bishop shoved back from the table. We leave. Now. None of us argued. We bolted back to our rooms, packed in under 5 minutes, and were on the highway before the town had even woken up. The sun climbed higher. The road stretched out, long and empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling, the weight in my chest, like I wasn't alone, like something was still watching, waiting, and then a whisper, not from the back seat, not from my phone, not from the wind outside the window, inside my head. Asterisk, you can run. Asterisk, asterisk, but you can't leave. Asterisk. I slammed on the brakes. Bishop and Travis shouted, cursing, but I didn't hear them, because in the rear-view mirror, there was someone sitting in the back seat. Not a person. Not exactly. It was thin, so thin I could see the sharp edges of bone pressing against pale, waxy skin. Its arms were too long, fingers tipped with blackened nails. And its face, it didn't have one, but it smiled. The car skidded to a stop. Tires screeched. Gravel spat up from the road. Bishop swore, gripping the dashboard. What the hell, man? Travis twisted in his seat, eyes wild. What happened? I couldn't answer. I couldn't move. The thing in the back seat was still there, still watching, still smiling. And then it started leaning forward. My breath caught in my throat. Every muscle in my body screamed to move, to run, to get out of the car, but I couldn't. I was frozen, trapped in that endless moment as the thing reached one long, skeletal hand toward my shoulder. Its fingers brushed against me. Cold, not just cold, asterisk wrong star, like touching something that shouldn't exist, something that had never been alive. I jerked away, slamming my back against the door. Bishop and Travis still didn't see it. They were staring at me like I'd lost my mind. Drive. I gasped. My voice barely worked. Just asterisk drive starred. Bishop hesitated for only a second. Then he threw the car back into gear and floored it. The thing in the mirror laughed. The sound was faint, hollow, like wind rattling through dead leaves. Then it vanished. Just asterisk gone star. I twisted in my seat, heart pounding. Nothing there. The back seat was empty, but the cold lingered. And I knew, asterisk, I knew asterisk. It wasn't gone. It was just waiting. We drove for hours. Didn't stop. Didn't talk. Didn't breathe until we crossed state lines. Even then, I could still feel it. Like something was sitting just behind me, just out of sight. Bishop pulled into a rest stop. He killed the engine, hands shaking. No one spoke. No one moved. Finally, Travis cleared his throat. We need to talk about it. I shook my head. No, we don't. Man, you freaked out. We all saw it. What the hell happened? I couldn't explain it. Didn't want to. So I just said the only thing that mattered. It's still with us. Bishop stiffened. That's not funny. I'm not joking. Travis glanced at the back seat, rubbing his arms like he was suddenly cold. I stared at my hands. It said, one of us belongs to it. Bishop exhaled sharply. Then how do we stop it? I didn't have an answer. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized we've been playing this whole time. We went to that house thinking it was just a story, just a thrill, but it wasn't a game. It was real, and we had touched something we were never meant to. The motel room felt too small, too close. The others fell asleep eventually. I didn't. I sat on the bed, staring at the shadows in the corner, waiting. And then it happened. The air changed. The temperature dropped. The shadows stretched, twisting. And I felt it, standing in the corner, watching me. My throat tightened. My fingers clenched into the blankets. I didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't blink. And then, slowly, it stepped forward. The light flickered. The air felt heavy, like the room itself was holding its breath. I couldn't see its face. Didn't need to. I knew what it was. And then, it spoke. Not out loud. Not in a voice. Inside my head. Asterisk, you think you can leave? Asterisk, my pulse hammered. Asterisk, you think distance matters? Asterisk, I couldn't answer. Couldn't move. Asterisk, I already told you. Asterisk, a pause. A slow, cold breath against my ear. Asterisk, one of you still belongs to me. Asterisk, I clamped my hands over my ears. Shut my eyes. Tried to block it out. It didn't work. Because I knew the truth. It wasn't just a voice in my head. It was inside me now. Waiting. Morning came. Sunlight poured through the curtains. Bishop and Travis stirred awake. Stretching, yawning. Everything looked normal. But I knew it wasn't. Because when I went to the mirror, I saw it. Not in the reflection. Behind my eyes. A shape. A shadow. A presence. Still watching. Still waiting. Still inside me. I turned away. Didn't tell the others. Didn't tell anyone. Because it didn't matter anymore. I knew the truth. I belonged to it now. And sooner or later, it would come collect.